Welcome to Va-Dor's Touch of Torah. This evening is March 8th, 2022, and we are lucky and fortunate to have Rabbi Barry Silver, our spiritual leader and advisor to Va-Dor. And tonight, we're starting our brand new book of Leviticus with the parsha VaYikra. Take it away, Rabbi.
Thank you very much, Sharon. So before we start, we have to conclude the last passage, the last book of Exodus, which we say, Chazak v'nit chazik. That means, may we be strengthened by reading from the Torah. In the Torah and in Judaism, we say the same word over for emphasis. So sometimes they say the word twice, chazak. In this case, it's actually three times. V'nit chazik means let us be strengthened. So we conclude Exodus and we begin the book of Leviticus. Leviticus starts out in Hebrew with VaYikra. Leviticus in English means having to do with the Levites. It's said in Latin because they want to make it sound fancier. So Leviticus means pertaining to the Levites. In Hebrew, it's called VaYikra because that's the first significant word in the story in this book of the Bible. VaYikra means and he called. It's kind of weird because the book of the Bible starts out VaYikra et Moshe vayomer Adonai. It's and he called Moses. It's like, well, wait a minute, who called? This is the very first sentence in Leviticus. You would think it would say who the person is that's doing the calling, like, and God called. It just says and he called. The rabbis say that, well, that's because it's really carrying over from Exodus. It's continuing the story in Exodus. And in Exodus, what happens is God's presence fills up the tent. And at sometimes in the story, if God's presence is in the tent, Moses comes right in and he's talking to him face to face. But other times it says if God's presence is there, Moses and nobody can show up. So it says in this instance at the end of Exodus, and God was there, and so Moses did not enter because he would not enter with God's presence there. So it says God's presence was there, Moses wouldn't enter, VaYikra, and then he called Moses. So it's referring to God in Exodus, so that's the continuation. Now, the interesting thing about the book is that in English it's called Leviticus, from the Levites, and Levite is from the tribe of Levi. Now, Levi comes from a Hebrew word meaning to accompany. The Levites were the assistant priests. They accompanied the priest. But by a linguistic coincidence, Levite is related or sounds like the word levitate. To levitate means to lift up. And that takes us to the names of the different types of sacrifices that are described in the book of Leviticus. If you're an animal rights lover, you're not really going to be too crazy about the opening phrases and sentences in the book of Leviticus because it's all about sacrificing animals. In fact, there's so much sacrificing going on. They have different names or words for sacrifices depending on what type of sacrifice it is. But what's interesting is that, as I mentioned, Leviticus means to lift up. And one of the words for sacrifices, an olah. Olah is related to the word ole or aliyah. Ole is someone who moves to Israel. They make aliyah. And it's from the same root. Aliyah means to go up. Or we also say he has an aliyah. Aliyah is the same word as aliyah. Aliyah is the Ashkenazic form of the Sephardic aliyah. So when you're talking about Israel, you say aliyah. Making aliyah means you move to Israel because you're moving up. And someone who leaves Israel and moves from Israel to somewhere else is called a yored. Yored means they're going down. They're going downhill. So that's aliyah. Now, you also get an aliyah, which is the exact same word, just pronounced differently in Ashkenazic. Aliyah, again, means you ascend the bima and you're moving up. So Leviticus means, or is related to the word to go up. Olah means to go up. Why would that word be used for a sacrifice? Because the olah was a complete burnt offering. The entire animal was burnt to a crisp. Nothing was shared with the community. That's an olah. And the smoke goes up. And so that describes why it's called an olah. A more edifying reason that we could use today is that we're trying to move up and increase our spirituality. We're trying to move up to a higher level by making a sacrifice. Today, we believe that killing an animal doesn't really help us to move to a higher level. And so sacrifice has taken on a different type of meaning. Today, sacrifice doesn't mean to slaughter an animal. Literally, it means from the Latin, sacrifice means to make holy. It means we do something for a good cause. Usually a sacrifice is thought of as something that you'd rather not do, but you have to do. In other words, you're sacrificing something that you'd like you want to hold on to your money, but you sacrifice it for a higher purpose. But in the old days, the sacrifice wasn't really looked at like that so much. It was more like you want to come closer, and this is something that you feel really good about. Today, many people do feel good about making a sacrifice. You feel good. You feel edified when you can contribute to a good cause, or you sacrifice your time or your energy to something greater than yourself. At first, you might feel, I don't really want to do this. But when you're done or when you're in the midst of it, it's good. You feel good that you've done something to help other people. So that's one type of sacrifice, the olah. And that was a complete burnt offering. Nothing was left for humans. The whole thing was burnt. And in the Torah, it says that God sometimes finds that this sacrifice has a pleasing odor, a pleasing aroma. This harkens back to ancient peoples in Greek mythology. Also, they made sacrifices to animals to the gods. They had different types of sacrifice to the Greek gods. Most of the gods didn't want you to burn up the entire animal. What they did was you would sacrifice and sacrifice some of the animal, the people would eat the rest. They believed that the gods actually required nutrition from humans in order to sustain themselves. There's stories in Greek mythology when people were not able to make sacrifices and the gods were getting hungry and they started to starve and they needed people to make sacrifices. And so usually in Greek mythology, they would make a sacrifice of part of the animal and the humans and the gods would feast together on Mount Olympus. Some gods, though, wanted the whole animal. The gods of the underworld didn't want to feast with human beings, and so they burnt up the whole animal. That was called a holocaust. Holo from all or whole, cost means to burn. It's related to the word caustic, somebody whose demeanor is rather abrasive. So there's different types of sacrifice in Greek mythology, Roman mythology. Judaism inherited this sacrificial system. Judaism inherited this belief that the gods needed to be sustained with nutrition, which could be accomplished by burning an animal, and then because they were a spirit, they would imbibe the aroma of the animal. There's other types of sacrifices in Leviticus. So there's the olah, where the whole animal is burned. There's also zavach. Zavach comes from the word to slaughter. That's when they killed the animal, some of it went to God, and the rest, a portion went to the priesthood to sustain them, and the rest went to the people. There's different types of zavach, different types of sacrifices. One was called zavach shalamim. Shalamim is related to the word shalom, which means peace. But what many people don't understand is that the word shalom really has much more meaning than just peace. When we translate from one language to another, we often lose something because we don't know the origins of the word. So people hear shalom, peace, and they think of some hippies sitting around and maybe just chanting some music and singing about peace, right? With a tie-dye t-shirt, of course. In the Torah and in Hebrew, the word peace, shalom, is related to two other words. Shalem means full or to fill. It means that you fulfilled certain things in life that are prerequisites, so now you can relax and enjoy a moment of peace. It comes from doing something and its fulfillment, and now you can relax. It also is related to the word shalem, which means to pay. And sadly, we see today that many times humans have had to pay a heavy price for peace. Many people think that the way to achieve peace is just for everybody to be mellow and not bother anybody, just do your thing, and then you'll achieve peace. Sadly, that's not the case. We can see that today in Ukraine. If everybody just sat back and sang Kumbaya, there would not be peace. There would be no more Ukraine. Ukraine would have been overrun, and Israel wouldn't be around. And there would be no Jewish people in the world today. If nobody fought against the Nazis would have conquered, would have killed every Jewish people, every Jewish person. There would be no Jews. Peace very often comes by being kind to people and negotiating and working things out. But there's some types of people that are so mean and so vicious and so cruel that if you're nice to them, they'll just run right over you. And Israel, sadly, has experienced that. And sadly, they're now experiencing that in the Ukraine. These people don't have any interest in fighting. They don't want to send their boys off to kill people. They don't want to have to flee for their lives. But, well, they have a choice. They could submit and allow their country to be overrun and become dominated by a vicious, cruel dictator, or they can fight back. And they agree with Stéphane Charbonnier, who stood up to the Islamic fundamentalists, who said, Je préfère mourir debout que vivre sur les genoux. I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees. And so the people of Ukraine are fighting back. I am happy to see, in the midst of this tragedy, a huge movement throughout the world of helping them out. Neighboring countries collecting food, helping out the refugees, going out of their way to be kind. So when we look around at the world and we see how terrible this world is, how terrible people are that they're fighting, let us remember there's a far greater number who are helping. And those are the people that are the neighboring countries, people in America, and people throughout the world. They're also helping militarily by sending in arms, and volunteers are going in to help fight. And many of us are very, very proud of Vladimir Zelensky, the Jewish leader of Ukraine, who is so courageous and so brave, and who is standing up, not just for Ukraine, but standing up for freedom and against bullies. I think he's done more for the image of the Jewish people than anyone I can think of in a long time. He's a great leader, and we're lucky to have him. So that's all I have to say about, well, I'll say one other thing about the sacrificial system. It's clear to any rational thinker that the animal sacrificial system was a cruel, barbaric, and bloody waste of time. There were no gods out there who benefited from this. It didn't serve any useful purpose, but this concept of sacrifice has evolved. By the time you get to the prophets are saying, speaking through God. Prophet means to speak on behalf of. Many people think it means to speak in advance of, but it really means to speak on behalf of. The prophet speaking on behalf of God had evolved to a place where God's saying, I don't want your burnt offerings. I'm tired of them. I don't want to see this blood. What I want is I want to see your heart transformed. I want to see you change the way you are, to sacrifice the old you for a new you. And then Micah says, what does the Lord require of you? Only to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And Micah also says, enough with these sacrifices. Even before the end of the biblical period, our ancestors recognized that this was a colossal waste of time. And eventually they came to recognize that it was cruel and it was barbaric. The people who take the Torah literally and think God wrote it will never get to that stage of evolution. They will always believe that this was a good thing, because otherwise, why would God have required it? And it's very interesting and almost it's amusing to see how they do some kind of mental gymnastics in order to justify this and act as if God really would want you to kill an animal and he really finds the aroma of charred flesh to be pleasing to him. Fortunately, modern Jews don't have to try to rationalize the irrational or justify the unjustifiable. We can just simply say, this was an effort by our ancestors to move up, to be at one with the cosmos and the universe. We thank them and congratulate them on the effort. We think it's wonderful that they laid the groundwork for us, but today we know better and we found a better way of doing it. But we still thank them and admire them for starting down this path of trying to be at one with the cosmos and trying to elevate the caliber of our lives. So with that, I will end my comments and open it up for discussions and comments. If you agree, as I often say, I'd love to hear from you. If you disagree, I'd love to hear from you even more. That makes for an interesting discussion. Don't feel embarrassed to challenge me. I can take it. I can handle it. I'm up for it. So whatever you want to share is great. I see
Peter's hand
Peter.
raised. Go ahead, Peter.
Lay it on us.
All right. I'm glad to be the first one. Throughout listening to you, I thought about two things. So I have 2 points to make. Now I'm thinking about which one I want to start with. I'm going to start with, I wanted to mention this second, but I'm going to mention it first. I wish we had double the amount of people. I noticed there's 12 people now, but I wish we had double the amount, because what interests me about you, Barry, Rabbi Barry, and I'm really talking to everyone present for this Zoom meeting, is that your knowledge is such that it opens up such a, I'm trying to think how I could put this point across. You're just listening to you. I want everyone to really realize the knowledge that Rabbi Barry has and how it makes us understand and feel and think. So that's praise to you, Barry. That's what you do to me. Your wealth of knowledge really gives me new viewpoints. And I think you do this for everyone who's present.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I wanted to verbally explain what it does to me. So now that I stated that point, not that one took preference over the other, but the second one is that while I was listening to you, I thought about the word recompense. And you talked about not, helping and giving and doing things for other people without looking for anything in return. And when I have done that for other people, and I know that you're an old pro at it, okay? I know that from personal experience. But my point is, when you do things for people and you don't look for anything in return, it like increases your spirituality. It makes you, it puts you on a whole different level of feeling in a spiritual sense. So that's in regard to how you were explaining about doing things and helping without looking for the recompense, for the payback. So those are the 2 points I wanted to make.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. Well, thanks for your kind words. And also, it's true that the more you do for other people, you feel really good about it. And in fact, many people often feel depressed in their lives, or they suffer a loss, and they just don't know what to do. They just can't get out from under this horrible feeling. And one way of dealing with that, of transcending the pain that you feel inside, is to think about other people and help other people. And it just has a wonderful way of transforming your feelings of depression and getting beyond them, and to realize that there's other people out there that are also going through difficulties and you can help them. So thank you very much, Peter, for your kind words. I think you opened it up in a very wonderful fashion. Anybody else want to share some thoughts about the Torah? Go ahead, Sharon.
I liked how you took a parsha that I know does not sit 100% with you, sacrifices, needless to say, but you turned it into something that we do sacrifices every day, whether they're for our family, for ourselves, for our friends, for our neighbors, for our synagogue, whatever, at work, if we work, So I like the way that you took sacrificing of human, or not human, of animals. And I was thinking when you were talking about the parsha of the sacrifices last week, my husband and I went to the Machu Picchu, which is now gone from the Boca Museum, the exhibit, and it turned my stomach a little bit. I knew it was an important exhibit to see, and to know what happened at Machu Picchu, as well as many other historic places throughout South America and Central America. But reading some of the things that they did, it just, the human sacrifice part and the blood and it really creeped me out. And then this parsha, coincidentally, about sacrifice. So I like that you brought in about the prophets. And I remembered something that Martin Wiesel mentioned a few weeks ago, that perhaps there's so many pieces of certain books like Leviticus and Numbers, possibly Deuteronomy, whatever, that some of the parshas are not 100% worthy of mention, some of them. I mean, there might be a couple words within each one, but as a full sermon net or whatever. And perhaps blending in from the prophets, like you did tonight, is a great way to supplement the Torah with the Haftorah part. And I think that's great to blend that and to bring us not just Torah, but the Haftorah as well. And I think that's great. Does the Micah part, does that coincide with this Torah portion, or it was just a different Micah? It was a Micah part that goes with something else.
I'm not sure if Micah is the Haftorah assigned to this sedra. I don't know that, but I do agree with Rabbi Bissol, who's on our board, that it's really important. And I'm going to try to I'm trying to do this more, to bring up other parts of the Bible from later writings, and including the prophets, so that we get a more well-rounded view also of something that is very often overlooked, that Judaism has been evolving and changing over the course of the eons, and it's a really good thing. If we were living under Torah law, it would be like Sharia. It'd be like living under Sharia law. And Judaism has always been changing and evolving, and I'm going to do my best to give a more rounded picture of all of it. I'm going to make a confession to you also, a sneaking confession. So I love listening and reading the Four Horsemen of Atheism. They're Dennett and Sam Harris and Dawkins, and one of the greatest spellbinding speakers of all time, Christopher Hitchens. And they're merciless in finding flaws in religion and showing why a fundamentalist worldview couldn't possibly be true, and finding things in the Bible that don't make sense. I love listening to them because I seek truth, and I listen to them, and then but I think that in their zeal to point out the flaws of religion, they also fail to notice anything positive, or they explain it away. So what I do is I use all of that information from them. I don't say, well, I'm not going to use anything from them because they're anti-religion. I incorporate all of it, but I take it another step. I take it a step further. I retrofit it back, and I say, what were they trying to do? Even the people at Machu Picchu, what were they trying to do? Were they cruel, vicious, nasty, horrible human beings who wanted to just kill people? No. What we know from anthropology is that they must have felt horrible when they did this. This wasn't something that they felt good about. They felt that in order for the sun to rise, in order for the crops to yield their harvest, the gods required them to take a human life and to pay for that. They had to make a sacrifice in order to get the gods to do the right thing. And so it wasn't that they were mean and nasty, but their goal and the reason they did it was positive. It was for a good thing, but they just didn't have the right information. And the thing about the Torah is that we've learned and we've evolved. So we take that impulse to want to provide for the people, to want to have good crops, to want to have peace, to want to express our gratitude. And we found a better way of doing it. I don't think the four horsemen of atheism quite get to that point. And that's why I think what we're doing at Va-Dor, we're using reason and science to point out the flaws, but we don't leave it there. We say that religion is evolving, and if we take the impulse that guided our ancestors and use reason and apply it, we can accomplish really great things. I also want to expand upon this concept just a little bit. There were different types of sacrifices. There was one called Zavach Chatat. Chatat is related to Chet. You've probably heard of Chet when you say Achet Shechatanu. It means a sin offering. You do something wrong, you commit a sin, and you use a sacrifice, which was an animal, because that was their property. That's how they donated. They didn't have money necessarily, so they donated an animal to try to expiate the sin, to try to make themselves whole. There's another sacrifice called Zavach Shalamim, which, as I said, is related to the word shalom. What that was is a sacrifice of well-being. You're giving a sacrifice to give thanks. You have bounty and you're doing well and you want to give thanks, and you share that with other people. It's a really beautiful concept. Within this sacrificial system, you find things, as Sharon says, that are very edifying and redeeming. And the Zavach Shalamim was a sacrifice that was made where somebody says, I just want to share my good fortune and I want everybody to partake of this sacrifice. It wasn't always an animal either. Sometimes it was flour, or sometimes it was oil, or bread, or different things like that. So yes, we can get a lot out of the Bible once we're free and liberated from the concept that this was divinely written and everything in it is accurate. Because, like Sharon mentioned, the concept that we're just going to do something out of faith without questioning, without asking, can lead to actually sacrificing your own children in very grisly ways, which I won't go into, but if you want to learn the history of it, it was not pleasant what they did. And so it's good that we can use reason in order to accomplish good purposes in a better way.
Hi, couple of things, just to harken back to the Machu Picchu exhibition. I did go and see it. And what struck me was the dichotomy that they're supposedly so barbaric with all of their sacrifices, and yet they were so advanced as far as the ecology. They would cut the mountains, when they would cut their steps, and they would plant certain things on certain sides of the steps at certain times of the year, and their irrigation system, which was a natural irrigation system. I mean, it was just remarkable how in some areas we should really harken back to them, and yet we thought that they were so barbaric by all of these sacrifices. And Rabbi Barry explaining their mindset could possibly not exonerate that, but at least explain the reasons for it. But I think that we need to look back to see what they were doing ecologically, planting, and with all of their food sources, because it was quite remarkable. It was a huge population that they were able to feed. It was unbelievable. That's my opinion.
Couldn't agree with you more. I definitely agree with you, and I must compliment you on your observation that people that lived thousands of years ago with the tools that they had did a remarkable job and showed great wisdom and have much to teach us about how to live in harmony with the environment. We would do very well to try to learn some of those lessons. And part of the reason, again, I'll blame the fundamentalist reading of the Bible, which says that God put the earth here for us to use and to exploit, and it's ours. And it seems like there's a never-ending supply. There's a better way of looking at it, is how native peoples generally do, that we're part of the ecosystem and we need to live in harmony with the ecosystem, not on top of it, dominating, conquering nature. We should learn to live in harmony with nature is a much better metaphor that that earlier cultures have to teach us. Well, everybody, It's been a pleasure chatting with you about the Torah, about current events. I thank you for joining with us, and keep spreading the word. And next time, hope to see you on Friday night. Should be a fun service over at the Carlisle, and we're planning it right now. Hope to see you there in person or on Zoom. Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you, everybody, for joining in the discussion. It was really great.